How do you get into a top PhD doctoral program in clinical psychology? Stick around and follow me on this step-by-step tutorial today on navigating academia. What's up, everybody? My name is Dr. J. Phoenix Singh, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Navigating Academia, your leading source for guidance on how to be able to progress your career in academia. As always, I appreciate the love, so please do take a second right now to be able to like this video, share it with your friends, with your colleagues, with your students, subscribe to our channel, and also hit that bell to be able to make sure that you get notifications anytime that we post a new video. You can follow me at the social media accounts below. So let's jump right in. Today we're going to be discussing how you can get into a top clinical psychology doctoral program to be able to get your PhD. Now I'm going to be making a separate complimentary video on how to be able to get into leading PsyD programs. So if that's you, please do take a look at the link in the description below to be able to guide you to the right place if you're looking for that kind of a program. Today we're going to be focusing on PhD programs in clinical psychology, specifically in the United States, but the guidance is going to be general enough to be able to give you a good sense of what you should be doing, regardless of what country you're applying to be able to get your degree in. Now, before we get started, I want to give you some general notes. If this is going to be the career for you, you want to make sure that number one, you're only attending an accredited program from the American Psychological Association, also known as the APA. You want to avoid any schools where accreditation is under review or any programs where they say, well, we've applied for it, we should be getting it in the next year, etc. Just hold off there. It's too risky if you're going to put yourself into a clinical PhD program and this thing's going to take you 5 to 7 years to be able to get the job done. Oh my gosh, and you get in and then the program's not accredited. I've had several friends go through this kind of an experience. It was a nightmare for them. So be sure to pick one where their accreditation is in good standing. If you have any doubt, call American Psychological Association. There's a division specifically on clinical psychology, and just ask them. The second thing that I want you to take into consideration in terms of general notes before we get to the step-by-step process is that keep in mind that what is considered a top program in clinical psychology in your specific subfield is going to differ from all other subfields. For example, I used to be in forensic psychology. In this field, some of the universities, it's not Harvard, it's not Yale, it's not Princeton, it's Drexel, Sam Houston State, UC Irvine, universities that, are not these Ivy League schools, but they have phenomenal programs and phenomenal faculty. And it's very important to do some research and identify what are the programs for you before you take this plunge. It's absolutely critical. And obviously, you only want to apply to programs that you would actually attend, which I know seems obvious, but some people say, I'm going to hedge my bets and apply to 50 universities. This is an undergrad. That is not a good idea. And finally, the third thing that I want to mention is that the quality and the reputations of programs change over time. Just because a program may have been phenomenal, let's say 10 years ago, and because of that gave you an impression when you were, let's say, like in high school and first started looking into this as a career path, it depends on, these sorts of things, when you start doing research, who you're asking. So some mentors may say, these are the 3 best programs in your subfield in, let's say, developmental psychology. And then you actually take a look at those programs, all the faculty members that your mentor mentioned, they may all be gone. There's a high turnover rate in academia, especially when people are moving universities, which oftentimes people do because, let's say that their partner has moved somewhere else, or their child has gotten into a university somewhere else, or they've gotten a better job opportunity, it's going to pay them more, whatever it is. Rather than following the university, you need to follow the faculty members and identify the goodness of fit with different potential supervisors. This is absolutely critical. So just because a university has an amazing amazing reputation in terms of just overall doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect for you. So really take that into account. Fields are small, and if you're going to be a researcher, for instance, you want to make sure that whoever your supervisor is somebody who has a lot of cachet in the field, because that's going to give you a lot of cachet when you say, I was trained by, Dr. such and such. That can give you a lot of cachet, so that's important to take into consideration. But let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the different steps that are going to get you into a good doctoral program. And I'm trying to make this as practical as I can for you. Step number 1 is to get good grades. I know this seems obvious, but what is a good grade? What is a good GPS? What is a good GPA? The best thing to do here is to be able to go to the program that you're interested in getting into, take a look at the website for that program, and usually somewhere on that website, it's going to give you information about the median and the IQR, the interquartile range of GPAs of current students, past students, the whole program in general, since it's been around, whatever it is. You want to be within the interquartile range. Don't worry about the average and the standard deviation. I want you to be within the interquartile range, then you're going to be fine. If you don't have at least a 3.5, I mean, consider going into a terminal master's or something to be able to get a better GPA. These are brutal in terms of the acceptance rates in clinical PhD programs. The program that I got into in the States, even though I didn't end up attending it, was a double doctorate, double PhD at my dream US university. So I got very, very lucky. And the acceptance rate was literally 2 people of hundreds of applicants. So the acceptance rate in most of these top universities is lower than medical school. And that's important to take into consideration. Everybody, for some reasons, thinks medical school, law school, etc. has the lowest acceptance rates, but clinical psych is right up there with these other beasts, right? And you also want to take a look not only at your GPA, you also want to take a look at your coursework selection. If you were taking a whole bunch of engineering classes because you thought that you were going to be an engineer initially, and then you switched, you'll expect people to ask you questions about that in your interview. If you have an interview, expect that if you took a whole bunch of courses, like a ton of courses in child development, yet you're applying for something that has nothing to do with children whatsoever, you need answers to questions that could sensibly be asked about the courses that you've taken. I remember I didn't get into Phi Beta Kappa, which is an honor society, even though my GPA was, I think it was like 3.9 or like 3.95. I didn't get in because Phi Beta Kappa told me that my GPA was great. However, I didn't have enough diversity because all I took was psych and child development classes. Because I wanted to be a clinical child psychologist. That was my dream. So because of that, I didn't get into Phi Beta Kappa for, in my opinion, the best possible reason, which is that I knew exactly what I wanted and I was going after it. And that's okay, right? But you just want to make sure that, if you do have diversity in terms of your course selection, that it's something where in terms of your GPA, that the things contributing to your good GPA are especially those psych classes. And let's say that, you get all A+ in forensic psych courses, and then, you get C's in all your developmental psych courses, but you want to get into a developmental clinical psych program. That's not a good sign. So you could basically have this conception in your head of, maybe I should take some more developmental classes and really work to boost that side of things. Because usually people are going to look at not only your overall GPA, but your psych GPA. And they'll, judge that based on your coursework. So take that into consideration. So that's step number 1 is, yes, it's true, you got to get good grades. Step number 2 is to get good test scores. Again, I know this seems like an obvious one, but what I want you to do is on that same page or the same area of the website for your dream program that talks about grades and GPA, usually it's also going to talk about median and interquartile range of test scores. Now, I don't know about you, I was always terrible with standardized tests. That was not my highlight, in high school with the SAT, not for me. ACT, I did much better, but SAT, oh my gosh, right? I mean, took it a few times, what? Just did not do very well. So knowing that, GRE for me was something that I was scared of, more scared than any other piece of the application process. And so I ended up spending a lot of time on it, and I'll give you some tips here in a moment. But don't just take a look at the overall scores, median and interquartile range. Also look at it for the verbal and the math. Usually people are better at one than the other. For example, for me, I was always better at the math than the verbal for some reason. So at least with this, you're gonna know where you need to be, and just be within that interquartile range. Don't worry about, what percentile you got into or anything like that. And also find out whether you need to take the GRE psychology subject test, because some doctoral programs require that and other ones do not. So some people, again, they hate tests so much that they'll just apply only to programs that don't take the GRE, but you should know that most of the major programs do require it. In terms of my experience, right, let me tell you what worked really well for me. Two things I'll mention. Number one is essentially just using behavioral psychological techniques to be able to make yourself good at taking this test. So for example, when you're in that actual room to take the GRE, and there's usually GRE different testing centers, there's certain things to mention. Number one, it should be pretty quiet. And number two, there's going to be people around you. Right? Usually, sometimes you're totally alone, right? And number three, they're going to provide you access to a few things. They're going to provide you access to, a piece of paper at least, a pencil, at least one. So always request a second pencil, always request additional scratch paper if they'll give it to you, and always request earplugs. And the key thing with the earplugs, right, and other people being around is, I don't want you to only study just in public or whatever, you're out at a coffee shop, I want you to study with earplugs in, and then I want you to study without earplugs. I want you to study with people around, like at the Starbucks, and then I want you to study with nobody around, totally alone, in case you're alone in that room. Now, when I went to take the test, I got my earplugs, and they were doing construction outside of the room. This is on a Saturday morning. I don't know how that happened, but they were doing construction outside, and I just remember it being like, oh, thank goodness I practiced studying around other people. And it was packed that day. So luckily I'd practiced in the library as well, where there were a lot of people around doing their own work. So I wasn't focused on other people or looking around. I wasn't nervous. Make sure that you have a watch, and that the watch, like for me, what I would do is I had an analog watch, not a digital watch, because usually in terms of smartphones, they have specific policies on these depending on the jurisdiction that you're in. But with the analog watch, they'll allow it, and you can essentially set it to just like total noon, right? Minutes and hours to total noon, right? To 12. And then when you start taking the test, right, hit the button, and that's going to help you time how long you have for that session. Works incredibly well. I personally find that with the earplugs in, it almost amplifies my internal speech. That works really well. Studying for the GRE takes a long time. I personally use Kaplan as test prep, and I attended in person, but the best thing that I did with Kaplan was taking their online, buying their online modules, which gave me not only so many tests, but so many modules of math problems and verbal things to test out different strategies and all. And again, I'm terrible at taking tests, and that was a lifesaver for me. And yeah, I needed to really be regimented and schedule it out, because nobody wants to study for standardized tests, but you have to do it. Right? You usually do it in your junior year, right? So your third out of 4 years of college. I did undergrad in 3 years, so it was my second year, and I just decided that I was going to take one semester and knock this thing out. So one thing that I did was that in terms of the courses that I selected courses that weren't too heavy, and the ones that I took at the time were also ones where the instructors would give me all the essay topics, the prompts, the readings, and everything well in advance. And what I did was busted my butt for the first month or so of these courses, did nothing but work. And I did all the essays and followed all the prompts, and I did all the homework, and I read everything and took copious notes to be able to review later on before tests. And then I was freed up, and I did nothing but GRE prep. And again, this is for your future. If you really want this, you're gonna have to sacrifice for it. Nobody's gonna give this to you. And if you think that you're out there having a great old time, partying and this kind of stuff, that there's not somebody else who's busting their butt and doing what I'm telling you right now, you are sorely mistaken, my friend. So you need to be one of the people where if you're really in it to win it, you are going to use these strategies, because I can tell you that if you don't have good test scores, you don't have good grades, you don't have research or clinical experience or connections or publications, etc., you are in deep trouble relative to people who have been planning this out for a long time and have all of those things. So really, guys, please prioritize. Figure out what's important to you and go after it, because you can do this. You really can, right? So this is step number 2, get good test scores. Step number 3 is to be strategic with your letters of recommendation. All too often I see people come to me and say, Dr. Singh, what I want to do is get these 3 individuals to write my letters. And when I ask why, they'll say, oh, they were my favorite professor, or this person likes me the most, or this person is the biggest name in our department. Even though I don't know them that well, it's the biggest name in our department, so it'll hold more cachet. Huge mistake. Huge mistake on all fronts, okay? You need 3 letters, which is par for the course, sometimes 2, sometimes 5, 3 is par for the course, okay? You need 3, and each writer needs to speak to a very specific thing, and you need to be the one to take responsibility to let them know exactly what you want them to write in terms of what perspective of you want them to focus on. The first is you want somebody who knows your grades and your course selection, can talk to how amazingly you did in these courses, how you're so dedicated, and it shows in these courses that you took that these were challenging courses at the university and the writer knows that, but you excelled in them. Fantastic. But they're not going to talk a lot about your personality. They're not going to talk about any outside experiences you had in terms of clinical or research experience. They are focused on your grades and your course selection, period. Number 2 is going to be somebody who worked with you, preferably supervised you, as opposed to working alongside you, in either a research or clinical placement. This is somebody who has seen you. They've seen you in the field, on the ground, and they can talk about, this is somebody with really innovative ideas. This is somebody who, is a pleasure to work with. You're a team player. You follow directions. This is graduate school. You're going to have a supervisor who's going to expect you to follow orders. And yes, to be as intelligent as you clearly are, to be somebody who's coming up with great ideas, etc. But you need to be a soldier because they're the general and they're going to give you those marching orders. You need to establish that you thrive in that kind of an environment. And that is number 2. Third letter is you need somebody who knows you personally. For me, I had one professor who was, to this day, one of the people most dear to me, and she was a phenomenal professor. And even though she had so many things to do when she had a night class, she would stay after to be able to talk to me about theory and my ideas on things, and she got to know me so well personally. So her knowing my personality, that's what I wanted her to focus on. And I didn't have her talk about me as a student in terms of my grades. I didn't have her talk about my research and my clinical experience. It was only me, and focusing on those important aspects of a clinical personality, for example, being very empathic, or focusing on important research things like he's very meticulous, he's very detail oriented, very methodical about how he goes about doing things. So be strategic in terms of those letters. Step number 4 is getting clinical experience, which is kind of obvious, right? You need to show that you're actually interested in a career as a clinician. Now, at the end of the day, you're going to maybe have to hunt a little bit to find places that'll allow you to do an undergraduate clinical practicum of some kind. This can be really hard to find if your university doesn't have any contacts with local clinics, etc. But there are summer internship programs that are out there. Simply, use a search engine, take a look, go to career services and chat with some people, talk to your departmental supervisor in psychology, to the head of the department, etc. And really take a look at what's available in your area. Be it where your university is, or let's say that you're going to be home for the summer, a place that's kind of around your parents' place or wherever you happen to be staying that summer. Now, you don't just have to do this during the summer. Usually you can get independent study credits if you do something like this, just making sure that you have an individual who serves a supervisory function who will be able to usually assign you a pass or fail grade. Some cases, you have the standard grading system, but my experience has been that usually this is graded more as pass or fail. If possible, make sure to match the demographics of the clientele that you're going to be working with or who you're going to be observing other people working with the population that you want to work with in graduate school. So for example, if you want to be a child psychologist, clinical psychologist, you may want to work at a place that has children there and not exclusively, let's say, elderly clients. If you want to be a geropsychologist and work with the elderly, maybe you wouldn't want to work at a preschool, for instance, shadowing the school psychologist. Make sure that to the extent possible, you can get a goodness of fit there. And keep in mind that usually you're going to have to go through some paperwork, maybe a criminal background check, and you're really going to be under a lot of scrutiny, because if people there are licensed clinicians, and maybe you're something like I was a behavioral coach at a place called the OCDI, it's the Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Institute up at McLean Hospital in Belmont, Massachusetts, provided me with a tremendous amount of insight that I had never gleaned before in any other setting. I'd done a clinical practicum the previous summer, so not during school time, down in Connecticut with the Department of Youth Services, to be able to do some work, assessment work with juveniles who had been convicted of crimes. But at that time, it was something where, the things that I was administering were really very basic, especially relative to, when you get into grad school, etc., the game really changes. But that goodness of fit is really important if you can get it. If you can't get the goodness of fit, settle for the clinical experience. It's fine. You can explain that and find a way to be able to make your story make sense. So you can say, I worked with children, in prisons because I'm very passionate about bullying amongst adults in workplaces, and this is, what I foresee to be a precursor, this specific population being more at risk for that behavior when they grow up. So this is the reason why it was a good fit for me. You just have to figure out something that makes the story make sense. You can't have things all over the place that's not going to look good if you're trying to build a cohesive application that makes sense, right? And finally, are there any local well-known clinics, hospitals, or even individual clinicians that are associated with the graduate program that you're interested in applying to? If so, then that should be your first port of call in terms of the place to work or the people to work with. But nevertheless, end of the day, step 4, get clinical experience. Step number 5 is to get research experience. Now you've got the clinical piece out of the way, but keep in mind this isn't a PsyD, this is a Ph.D. And Ph.D. programs, at least in the United States, are training you for a dual purpose. You're a scientist practitioner. That was the practitioner part. Now we got to establish your interest in the science part. If you're exclusively interested in nothing other than being a clinician, maybe a clinical PhD isn't necessarily for you, because it's a lot more comprehensive on the research side, and it's not as specialized as maybe some PsyD programs can get. But in terms of getting research experience for your PhD program applications, ask your supervisor about labs that are in your department that you can volunteer for. Sometimes you can actually get independent study credits, just like when it comes to the clinical piece. Again, explore, summer internships at the university, at other universities, and don't confine yourself to labs just in your department. Let's say that you're in the psych lab, but you're really into social psychology. Maybe there's a lab in sociology that's doing really interesting stuff, or anthropology that's doing really interesting stuff. So that's where you want to jump to. So long as there's a goodness of fit there, again, that you can explain, because it's up to you to be able to make that story of your life, then it's going to make sense. Now, also though, I want you to keep in mind that there's certain things that can make you particularly alluring to that application committee. And one of the big ones is if you can find some way to be able to help with a grant. Oh my gosh, this is a big thing. Now, no, you're not going to be a principal investigator or a co-PI. You're not going to be an investigator or a co-investigator. No. But you'll be somebody who maybe can be acknowledged in the grant application, for example, and you can say, or you can have, for example, one of those 3 letter writers. Maybe this is somebody who, is going to be that number 2 that I mentioned in terms of the letters, which is somebody who's worked closely with you in a research capacity. If they can say he worked with me, she worked with me on this grant, and it worked out really well, Oh man, this is huge because, units of currency, remember, within academia are publications and grants. And if you can show that you're helpful in that regard, you're a good soldier, wow, that's going to be a big, big feather in your proverbial cap. Right? And just like when it comes to clinical work, make sure you've got a goodness of fit in terms of the research that you're doing and having it somehow related to something clinical. For example, for me, I was very interested in bullying, in childhood bullying. To me, this was fascinating. The literature, it's aging myself. Social media wasn't really a big thing back then, right? I don't think Twitter had come out, these things, certainly no Instagram or anything like that, no Snapchat. But it was something where I had tremendous interest in that area, and there was nothing on bullying happening in my university. However, there was one lab, and it focused on social psychology, specifically emotion recognition. And the more I delved into the literature on bullying, the more that I understood that in terms of bullies, that there was the strong correlation between a lack of accurate emotion recognition and higher rates of perpetration of bullying. So I said, hey, I can tie this in. This is a story that makes sense for me, which is tremendous. So that's something to be able to make sure that you've got that goodness of fit. Find a lab where you can establish that and make sure that you can have a story that ties the research you're doing into clinical practice in some way, shape, or form. Step number 6 is to get publications. Oh man, as an undergraduate, this is going to be a huge pain in your butt, because usually the lowest level that you get published at is a graduate student. No, you're not going to be the first author on a publication. It's exceedingly rare. I somehow lucked out, and I'll make a separate video on this about how to get an academic book contract, but I really lucked out in so many ways, worked incredibly hard, and got third authorship on a textbook that was being worked on in my department for one of my double majors, and that made all the difference for me because it was in child psychology and child development, and oh wow, I mean, that was like a deal maker for me. If you can show that if nothing else you're interested in publishing, that's going to go a long way on that scientist part of proving that you want to be a scientist practitioner. Now, it's fine if instead of, usually in American Psychological Association format, you usually have the authors, then parentheses, you usually have the date of publication. Or if it's under review, you would say under review. And one thing that you can do is say in preparation or submitted. Now, if you've submitted something and you don't know whether it's actually under peer review, you can say something like submitted. But what I recommend is that if, let's say you've done a senior honors thesis, milk that thing for all it's worth. You've done a capstone project, great. Put that report in there and put under, not under review, in preparation where the quote should be and where the date should be. That is going to take you a long way into, if nothing else, make a publication section of your CV, of your resume, and put that in there. That's going to help a lot. And, at the end of the day, it's so important to just ask for the things that you want. Again, a running theme of this series is nobody is going to be your best advocate other than yourself. So make sure that you ask. The worst thing that can happen is somebody says no or not yet. But if you talk to whoever your supervisor is, the head of your lab, maybe you're working with a graduate student at that lab, and you tell them that you're interested in getting on a publication to help you get into graduate school, and you're willing to put the work in and the effort in and really be that gopher, meaning, you'll run the data analysis, you'll clean the data, you'll get down in the muck to be able to get this done. Trust me, if they trust you, this can be done. Another idea that you can have is, for instance, I did a summer internship and I told them, I said, don't pay me. I said, I don't want to get paid. What I really, really need is to get on a publication, to get on paper. I need to get a really good letter of recommendation. Those are the two things I need. And I knew that the person I was working with had connections with another university where I really wanted to go. I said, and if you can help me network there, this would be the dream. I said, so much more value to me than the pay. So yes, it took an investment on my front to be able to pay for rent at, a little place or whatever that, looking back now, I probably would not have stayed in. But at the time, it was great. So, if you spend that money wisely, take a couple of side jobs or something like this to be able to fund it, it can help you immensely get to where you need to be. Now, I know that at this point in the video, you may be saying, Dr. Singh, this is crazy. There's so much work I have to put in. I feel like I'm starting so late. all is not lost. It's really not. Just make sure that you start picking up the slack right after you start watching this video. Do the background work you need to do. You can set up a free consultation call with me so that we can chat about it and we can work towards getting you where you need to be, okay? But if this is your dream and really what you want to do, then this is something that's really important, is to find a way to get published if you can. And if not, at least make it clear you're interested in it by having a senior honors thesis, a capstone, something to be able to put on that resume, okay? The final thing to mention is that yes, you can put conference presentations and at least do at least one poster. It can be at your university. They'll virtually always, your department or the university will have, some sort of almost like an undergraduate science fair where you can put posters up and stand in front of them, practice just like you were going to an academic conference. If you can get to some conferences, especially some nationwide ones, wow, that would be terrific. Plus, you can network with some people who may be your future graduate supervisors. If you can meet them there and introduce yourself in person so they can put a face with a name, write to them beforehand and let them know you're going to be there. Oh my gosh, you're made in the shade in terms of that front, the connections piece. That's fantastic. Can even invite them to stop by your poster or come to your paper presentation, acknowledging that they're very busy. And if they don't have time, that's okay, because you'll follow up with them and you will send them a copy of it afterwards. And that's great, because if they end up seeing your name more often, mirror exposure effect, they're gonna like you more. They won't know why, but they will. And even if they forget your name, if they end up seeing it, something's gonna ring a bell and they'll be like, I don't know why, but I feel like I've seen this person. It's gonna make them think that you have a lot of cachet, and it's also going to make them think that, wait a minute, if I know this person's name, maybe I can type their name in. And if you sent them an email and they type your email or your name in and it shows up, they'll be like, oh, this is that person from that conference. They got in touch with me. They were at this conference that I was at, which obviously if they're giving a talk at a conference, usually the academic is going to think quite highly of that conference, enough to be able to actually go to it and spend their time and sometimes their money going to be able to give that talk, that presentation. So only good things can happen from this. But make sure that use classic APA format in terms of whatever edition it is. It's 6th edition right now at the time of filming this, but make sure that you put that under publications. That is a great place to put it. If you have a lot of them, you can even make a separate section that's called presentations or conference presentations, etc. Step number 7 is to build connections. Specifically, you want to try to build connections with the supervisor or supervisors that you want to be working with in grad school, especially for the clinical PhD. Getting accepted by the program isn't so much how it works, so much as having somebody there, a supervisor that wants to work with you and advocate for you to get accepted because they want to be your supervisor. In some cases, that's not how it works, but in most cases, it is. So because of that, don't think about it as, I want to get into this program and then I'll pick a supervisor. That's a bad idea. The supervisor is the one who's going to make or break your graduate school experience. So it's critical that you do that background research before applying, and in your application essay, mention the people you want to work with and why you want to work with them. Now, as you're building connections, there's 3 ways to do this really, and I'm going to make a totally separate video comprehensively going through how to approach a potential graduate school supervisor. So I will link that down in the description below. Make sure to check that one out. But to be able to paraphrase it, there's 3 different approaches you can take. The first is the riskiest approach, which is the direct approach. Simply go, call, email. I had somebody fax once, right, which is very interesting, right? Fax, set up a Skype, meet the person, in person at a conference, but take that direct approach and introduce yourself, say that you're interested in working with them. Now, again, I'm going to go into this a lot more comprehensively in that other video, so be sure to check that one out. Number 2 is the student approach, where you either approach former students of theirs or current students. I highly recommend that if you do this, you only approach people who are grad students or postdoctoral fellows in the past. People that, usually after you're a grad student or a postdoc of someone, you keep working with them. And because of that, this is somebody who's become very trusted to that supervisor you want to work with. So because of that, their words have a lot of cachet. So if you can get the right kind of introduction, whoa, that's going to make a really big difference. And approach number 3 is the collegial approach, which I believe to be the best, which is where you have somebody who's really an established person in the field, who has worked with this scholar in the past, wasn't a student of theirs, usually a contemporary of some sort, could be more old school, could be newer school, but is really a contemporary on par with that individual, who knows them very, very well, has a personal relationship, and can play that role of being the person to introduce you. It makes all the difference in the world. And you may have to use a lot of strategy to be able to find the right people who are connected in the right way. Take a look, for example, at the co-authors of on papers where the first author or the senior author, the final author, is your potential supervisor. Find out if there's anybody who's close to you or somebody who's somehow connected with your supervisor, etc. And I'll do another video that I'll link in the description below about what the heck does authorship order mean on these publications, because depending on where you are and what field you're in, whoa, it can mean totally different things. And you need to know that information when you're looking at these papers to make educated decisions. Check that video out. Step number 8 is what I refer to as the other stuff, right? So here I'm gonna lump in things like writing a killer essay, and always make it clear that you want to be a researcher as well as a clinician. To be frank, play down wanting to be a clinician if that's what you really want to focus on, because the people who are going to be your supervisors are not going to be full-time clinicians. Again, what they measure value in is things like grants and publications. If you say, listen, you're going to spend 5 to 7 years supervising me, then I'm going to go off and do my own private practice. I'm never going to publish anything. I'm never going to get any grants, etc. They're going to feel to an extent like they're wasting their time, because obviously they want somebody who's going to keep working with them, bring them onto more papers, bring them onto more grants. Whether they admit that or not, this is subconsciously going on. For me, it subconsciously goes on. I don't realize that that's why I'm making certain decisions, but I think that that's definitely a key thing that people take into consideration. The second thing is apply for an undergraduate grant or award at your university. I will make a separate video and link that in the description below. I will make a separate video for you on how to find and apply for awards, both as an undergraduate as well as a grad student, postdoc, or an early career professional. And you can do this really via any conference usually, or even within your university, there will be opportunities to win these things. Make sure also that you take advantage of things like writing a capstone project or a senior honors thesis. Shows that you're really serious about the research element. I want you to crush that interview. The interview, make sure you are cool, calm, and collected. If you can find out who the interviewers are going to be, oh my gosh, make sure you learn everything about them. Watch YouTube videos of them to be able to get a sense of their personality. If they're very high energy and fluffy and these things, be like that. If they're very stoic and quiet and straightforward, don't express too much emotion. Don't use too many adjectives. So for example, for myself, I'm more energetic, so I use words like very and extremely and wonderful and awesome and these things. But if the person is very stoic, use words like good and nice. It's just very straightforward, blunt, short, not emotional words. Avoid that kind of language. And finally, really try to get involved on your campus, or through national associations especially. They can be local, but if you can get to them national, to be able to get on certain student unions, student boards within your field. That's really critical. Keep it all within your field. Because as some final notes, number 1 is nobody cares about your extracurriculars anymore. This isn't undergrad. I don't care if you, were on the softball team or you played ultimate frisbee. I don't care. Right? People don't care about those things. If it has something to do with, your clinical experience, your research experience, totally care all day long. The fact that you're, the pie-eating champion of Boston doesn't exactly, make me very impressed. So when you're preparing your resume, your CV, etc., when you're explaining why you want to be a grad student somewhere, just really prevent yourself from going too deep in terms of those different aspects. Even if you say something like, I enjoy wakeboarding, why? Make it professional, guys. Just leave it out. It doesn't need to be in there. Second final note is read your literature. Don't just say, I remember one time when I was an undergrad and I talked about where I was going to be applying, and there was another applicant from my department, and she was wonderful. She was so nice. We were in so many classes together. I knew she wanted to apply to a clinical Ph.D. program. I said, where do you want to go? She said, I'm not sure. I said, what programs are you looking at right now? She's like, I don't know. She's like, something East Coast. So I said, okay. I said, what area do you want to research? And she's like, I think something with like mood disorders. So I said, oh, that's interesting. You know, like what specific area? And she's like, I don't know. I haven't decided yet. And this was like a month before applications were really due. That's not good. I want you to come up with a very absurdly specific research area. I want you to figure out the clinical population you want to work with. I want you to figure out some research questions, and I want you to figure out some methodologies to go along with it. So for example, I want to take a look in adolescents between the ages of 12 to 18, emotion recognition capabilities that are measured in, such and such a way, a specific emotion recognition paradigm, right? And I want to answer the research question of, is it the case that as adolescents age, their responsivity to more emotionally intense stimuli decreases, whatever it is, but be that specific. The more specific you are, the more that it shows committees that you really have put a lot of time into this. You're not just saying something like, yeah, I really want to help. If you just say that you really want to help people, you're going to be in trouble. I'm just telling you right now. Everybody wants to help people in this field. If you don't want to help people, why are you doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Everybody's saying that. You need something specific. If you say, this person, is a developmental psychologist, they're researching children, I want to research children. Great, but I need that really tight goodness of fit explained to me. Get specific. And the best way to do that is to read the research literature in general, especially focusing on the past 3 to 5 years, and find out the articles published by your potential supervisors in the last 3 to 5 years, and make sure that what you want to do and what they're doing right now has a goodness of fit. Because as I'll mention in other videos, it is the case that some people made a real name for themselves in one area of the field, but since that time, they have moved to other areas and have no interest anymore in what you're interested in. You gotta do your research, do your homework, and figure this out, okay? Next thing, again, either if you can't present at conferences, that's okay, but at least attend them. Make that financial commitment, ask your supervisor if they're going to any so that you can piggyback with them, because then they can introduce you to some people. You can ask them questions along the way, make sure not to bug them, but ask questions. This is a really good idea. Okay, next one, be wary of name schools. Just because you have a really big name school, remember I talked about early in this video the same thing? You got a big name school, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a good program. Find out by doing your homework what the best programs are for your specific niche of clinical psychology. Find out who the best people are within that niche in terms of researchers, and find, the places where, those two things align. Great program, great supervisor, amazing. That'll be a perfect school for you. And even if it doesn't have, a name, it's not a Harvard or Yale, etc., that is okay, because especially from the research perspective, I don't really care what school you go to. I care about who you worked with. If you name somebody who's a big deal in the field, that's going to have a lot of cachet with me. Yes, if you say you went to a big name place, it helps a little bit, but then if you mention who you worked with and I've never heard of them, it's like, okay, well, that's great, you went to a good name school. I think that's wonderful, but that's pretty much as far as it goes in terms of being impressing. And finally, I don't want you to be a pushover, but also I don't want you to be a jerk. Obviously, you don't want to be too cold when you're approaching people or acting like, you're the bee's knees and you're amazing and any university would be lucky to have you, but at the same time, you really do want to know your value and not be pushed over by any supervisors or anything like this who may be just looking for people that frankly they can abuse, because there are supervisors out there. Luckily, they are few and far between, but it's not unheard of in academia to have supervisors like that. So it's very important that you get some information on the supervisor before you actually take that plunge, and again, I'll be discussing that in other videos. But certainly don't be afraid of that. Most supervisors really do a terrific job. Alright y'all, thank you so much for watching. I want to hear from you in the comments below. What is your dream doctoral program in clinical psychology, and why do you think it's the best fit for you? What research into the program have you already done, and are you worried at all about your likelihood of getting accepted? And if so, how are you dealing with that? These are things that I really want to hear, and I want you guys to discuss them with me, so please do post below. I'll try to comment back as much as I can. As always, if there's any particular topic you want to hear on this series, post that below as well, any questions you've got, and we'll talk about it. And don't forget to like and share this video with your colleagues, with your friends, and especially with your students. Subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media if you're interested in one-on-one career counseling so that I can help mentor you through all of this. We can sit down and really take a look at your transcripts, identify your strengths and your weaknesses, get you connected with the right people, find you those clinical internships, find you those research internships, get you where you need to be to have the maximal chance of getting into your dream program. If nothing else, set a 1-hour consultation call with me via the website below, and let's talk about the possibility of some coaching to be able to get you where you need to be. Really, nobody can do this by themselves, and I know that feeling of sometimes feeling a little bit helpless in this process, so it would really be a pleasure for me to hear from you. Signing off, everyone. Have a great day, and remember to get out there, take chances, and be your best self. Thank you so much for stopping by, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here as always. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more in this series on navigating academia, please click on one of these links over here to be able to view more original content. I hope to see you there.